BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. In this episode, I will be responding to the Zodiac Killer Crimes of the Century documentary, revisiting Richard Gaikowski as a Zodiac killer suspect, and looking at some possible Zodiac-related crimes. Firstly, I would like to say that today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. Now, to begin, I want to share some things that I was discussing recently with Adam Ivester. He runs the Zodiac Killer channel, Real Zodiac Killer Revealed 2023, and we were talking about some disputes in the Zodiac Killer case. And very simply, I said that if Adam wanted to dispute the facts of the case with me, we could go on a show called the Zodiac Killer Debate Files, which is available on Planet X Filmworks and hosted by Ross Gerasi. And Adam was quite surprised about that because I am someone who does not endorse or support any specific suspect. And right now, I would like to begin the episode by asking you guys a challenge question. Do you think that people should be able to debate the facts of a case like the Zodiac Killer if they don't have a specific suspect? Now, to be clear, Adam did not tell me that I can't or that I'm not able to do that. He was just surprised that I proposed we go on the Zodiac Killer Debate Files. My response is very simple. Yes, people should be able to debate the facts of any true crime case, even without a suspect or even without committing to a specific theory. But there is one rule. There is one thing that must be accepted. They should make a list of points that they do want to support and defend, because it's almost an unfair advantage if someone is able to say, all right, this is my suspect and this is my theory, and the other person is just saying, I don't have a suspect and I don't have a theory, because then they can't necessarily be proven wrong, or like the set of claims that they're defending is just a giant question mark, and it's just going to turn into, well, I don't know, it's possible, I mean, maybe, but I don't know. And to avoid all of that, if people are actually going to be disputing the facts of the case, well, there are going to be observations that everybody has about something like the Zodiac Killer mystery. Even you listening to this right now, I'm sure there are observations that you've made about the case that you believe to be true. Make a list of 5 points, and then if the other person also has their list of points, and then you can talk about the reasons why you support them and how you would like to challenge the other person. So that's my take on the subject, but I would love to know what you guys think. You can put your ideas in the comments section down below, and feel free to visit Planet X Filmworks. You can like and subscribe to Black Box Online Radio as well as to that channel also. But to begin with today's episode, there is something that I really have neglected in following Zodiac-related content, and that is watching the Crimes of the Century documentary. It is available on Tom Voigt's YouTube channel, Zodiac Killer Official, and I've referenced it in a few other episodes and talked about some comments that other people have made about the Crimes of the Century documentary, particularly Richard Grinnell of ZodiacCiphers.com. But I watched it twice, actually. Once just to listen to what everyone was saying, and the second time to try and make notes of the panelists and the presenters and the comments that were made by people in the documentary. It does feature Robert Graysmith, the author of Zodiac from 1986, as well as Zodiac Unmasked, and it starts out by talking about the Zodiac Killer's first confirmed crime, the Lake Herman Road murders. And even then, even in the late 80s when this one was made, they're still talking about how David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen are parked in a car, they're sitting in the car, and then another vehicle pulls up next to them. That person would then exit the vehicle, and the way that Robert Graysmith described it was that person would have walked around to the driver's side and started shooting at David Faraday first, and then David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen both exited out the passenger side door, and then that's when they were accosted by the Zodiac. David was shot first, and Betty Lou Jensen was shot 26 feet away from the killer. That's what they said. And this is well before the internet. Countless people would dispute that narrative, and you will hear a lot about that in my future interview with Eddie McNamara. He is someone who was requested by one of the listeners to be a guest on this program, and on Fridays I'm releasing Zodiac Killer interviews. And the Lake Herman Road murders are very complicated and difficult to discuss because there are no surviving witnesses, but a lot of people believe that the Zodiac ordered them out of the car and David exited out the driver's side, not the passenger side, and they have their own forensic reasons for stating such, but it is still part of the mystery. The next point, though, I thought was a little bit, more of just me being a little bit petty, if I can be very frank. They did this recreation of the Zodiac Killer's third crime, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and for some reason, they had the Zodiac Killer walk in a very well-done hooded costume, an executioner-style hood, carrying a gun and a knife, targeting Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard at Lake Berryessa, the location of the crime. But they didn't have any type of reenactment where the killer would tie up Brian and Cecilia, and then this guy just walks over with a knife and starts attacking Cecilia Shepard, and she throws her hands up in the air, saying, oh no, please don't hurt me, or something like that. Absolute fiction. I mean, of course, it's widely accepted now, and absolutely everybody under the sun or in the darkness knows that they were tied up first. But the reason why I thought that was so bizarre to include in a presentation about the Zodiac Killer is there would have been all types of defensive wounds if the Zodiac had just been attacking Brian and Cecilia and they hadn't been tied up. I mean, maybe they thought it was just too time-consuming to film or something like that, but as you see from the David Fincher film, they did an excellent recreation of the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and Brian Hartnell, the surviving victim, even said in one of the documentaries that that was as realistic as it could have possibly been. But the same time is that the victims would have had the ability to fight back at Lake Berryessa if they hadn't been tied up, and that is the whole point. The Zodiac was a power-assertive serial killer, so I believe, and he wants to have control of the situation. He's using the gun to get control of them. If you've ever watched the movie The Devil's Rejects, one of the Rob Zombie films, they openly say the gun is all about mind power, and that's exactly what the Zodiac was doing at Lake Berryessa. Now, it was loaded, and he had the ability to use lethal force if necessary, but that's primarily what it was about, mind power. Now, the final thing that I'll share with you guys from the Crimes of the Century documentary goes back to Robert Graysmith, someone whom I've been terribly critical of. Longtime listeners to Black Box Online Radio will know that I do not think very highly of Graysmith because I think that he is a true crime writer that blends in fictitious statements to the nth degree. It goes so far beyond the Zodiac world and even getting into his other books, and he just does this so blatantly. And Marley Renfro, who's the subject of Robert Graysmith's book The Girl in Alfred Hitchcock's Shower, more or less said that it's done intentionally. And if you'd like to hear more about that, I have an episode on her. It's called The Murder of Myra Davis and the Story of Marley Renfro, and he gets this type of criticism all the time. But what he did say was that after the Lake Berryessa stabbing, the Zodiac Killer murders Paul Stein, the taxi driver, on October 11th of 1969, and the reason why the Zodiac has now deviated from being this serial killer that's attacking couples parked in cars in lovers' lane settings is he wants to commit a crime that's closer to the heart of San Francisco. He wants to commit a crime in a more populated area because new precincts, new districts, new media outlets. He wants to get a bigger audience because at this point the Zodiac Killer has already proven to himself that he can commit murder and get away with it. He has already proven that he can make phone calls and say, if you go 1 mile east on the Columbus Parkway, stuff like that. And he's already proven that he can brag about his crimes and not get caught. Now he wants to do this on a bigger scale. He wants to do this not only in a more populated area, but in a place that's going to get more attention, and there's going to be more news coverage, there are going to be more discussions, more people are going to be talking about the Zodiac Killer. And he also cut off a piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt that was mailed in with multiple Zodiac Killer correspondences. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad observation. I've been terribly critical of Graysmith, but you don't have to have anything other than that observation by itself to evaluate. You can evaluate that one based on its own merits, and that makes a certain degree of sense to me. Partner that with the statements that have been made by the psychological profiler Richard Walter, who stated that because the Zodiac was a power-assertive serial killer, number one, he wants to commit the crimes. Number two, he wants to brag about the crimes. And with the Stein murder, he has committed the murder of Paul Stein. He has walked past multiple members of law enforcement. Donald Falcon, Eric Zelms would be an example of two of them. and he got away with it. He has proven to himself that he can get away with murder in multiple different scenarios. Now, he doesn't even have to commit the crimes because he's not a sexually motivated serial killer. He's a power assertive killer, and he can focus his attention on writing letters and designing the cryptograms, the 340 cipher, the Z13, the Z32, and I think all of that comes together somewhat well. But I told you in this episode that I would revisit the Zodiac suspect, Richard Gaikowski, and I would like to give a shout out to Andrew WVA, who sent this into the email address. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com, and Andrew did just that. And he says, "Hello, Ned. I'd like to revisit the alleged Albany Zodiac letter of 1973. On August 1st of that year, the Albany Times-Union newspaper received a letter along with the cipher. The beginning of the letter stated, 'You were wrong. I am not dead or in the hospital. I am alive and well again, and I'm going to start killing again.' The decoded cipher further stated that the Zodiac would kill someone at the Albany Medical Center. And Richard Grinnell has done an article on this, The Zodiac Killer in New York, ? And it's available at zodiacciphers.com. The apparent trigger for this letter was an article written by columnist Kermit J. Diker that was published on July 2nd of 1973 in an edition of the New York Daily News. Kermit J. Diker wrote, "Zodiac, a screwball with two hobbies, killing and cryptograms, and he hasn't been heard from for quite a spell now, and San Francisco's leading Zodiac watchers are finally convinced he's in jail or in a mental hospital or just dead. It's worth inquiring if Richard Gaikowski could have been visiting Albany, New York during this time period. One of my fellow researchers was actually able to confirm that Richard Gaikowski made 2 visits to Albany after moving to California. We do not know the exact dates of these visits. However, it is worth asking if there was anything in Gaikowski's life that would make mental illness a sensitive topic." Well, I could think of a few things off the top of my head, but let's keep going with Andrew's email. "In early November of this year, I was browsing through some government databases online, and I found a Social Security disability claim for Richard Gaikowski. Here are the details regarding the claim. The claim was first, some basic info. It was a claim. Richard Gaikowski was born on March 14th of 1936. The claim was on February 19th of 1972, and onset September 1968. It was submitted on February 16th of 1972. To the field office address, Civic Center in San Francisco, California, and the description was a life claim. According to Tom Voigt, this was most likely a mental health disability claim. Richard was briefly hospitalized in the early 1970s after a mental breakdown. Notice also that Gaikowski sets the onset date as September 1968, just a few months before the Lake Herman Road murders. One of my former colleagues who used to work for the government commented further on this information. According to her, this is a disability claim. The onset date is when he reported the start of his disability. It would include when his disability began to affect his ability to work or lead a normal life. The claim date is actually when he filed for the disability. So as we said, though, the onset date is September of 1968. Before the Lake Herman Road murders. To summarize, we have Zodiac possibly traveling on the East Coast in the summer of 1973 and visiting Albany. If the Albany letter is legitimate, we also have someone who is easily triggered by the suggestion that the Zodiac is mentally ill. Richard Gaikowski easily checks both of these boxes. And you guys on Black Box Online Radio know that I've been very critical of Richard Gaikowski as a Zodiac killer suspect. He's one of the more famous Zodiac suspects out there, even up there with Arthur Lee Allen. But even I was forced to admit that there are certain mental health clues that could be tied back to a movie called Shock Corridor from 1963, and I won't share too much about that because that was the subject of my Friday episode. I wasn't able to do a Zodiac Killer interview this week, but I was able to make a very small 20-minute episode, and I talked a lot about the movie Shock Corridor, which has this journalist that is pretending to be insane so he can infiltrate a mental institution and write a story. And he encounters this one individual who wears this hooded costume only for a very brief second. He wears this hooded costume with a circle that has a cross going through it, and he says that the cross circle is the Cyclos, which comes from Ku Klux, and he wears it to be invisible to his enemies, and very clearly he's stating that, yes, it's a Ku Klux Klan hood, and that was the direct motivation in the film, but the Ku Klux Klan was known as the Invisible Empire. That's a nickname that they had for themselves. I mean, I don't even want to I want to be more careful with my language than that. But yes, they call themselves the Invisible Empire. That was a widely held belief in the Ku Klux Klan, or it's a symbolic representation. And Sam Fisher, who is the author of the Zodiac Killer Identity and has Joseph Paul Franklin as his Zodiac Killer suspect, even wrote into the channel saying his suspect, Joseph Paul Franklin, talked about being invisible to his enemies. I'm not surprised about that, because Joseph Paul Franklin was a white supremacist. He is called the racist killer. So I definitely think he would be familiar with things like the Ku Klux Klan. Now, as far as Richard Gaikowski goes, I don't think that Richard Gaikowski was in the Ku Klux Klan, and I've certainly not heard that in any discussions. But the concept of wearing that hood ties into how Gaikowski would be more affected by the journalistic angles of this. Richard Gaikowski worked in the newspaper business for a very long time. He ran the Good Times newspaper, and the famous story that we all hear is that Richard Gaikowski intentionally got arrested for a journalistic project. When you look at that famous mugshot of him, which is the first photo that I ever saw of Richard Gaikowski, I was told, and you've been told, that that was the mugshot from when he got arrested on purpose. In the same way this journalist in the movie Shock Corridor is pretending to be mentally insane so he can infiltrate the institution. I mean, this could all be a coincidence, but those things definitely stand out to me. Now, as far as this email here from Andrew talking about the Albany letter, number one, of course, the Albany letter is unconfirmed. Number two, we do not appear to have a definite certification that Richard Gaikowski was in Albany at the time, but what stands out to me much more is this part here about filing a disability claim in September of 1968, when he started saying that his mental illness began to affect his work. Richard Gaikowski was definitely working, because he did the famous trip to Ireland beginning. The estimated date of departure was November 1st of 1968, when he went to Ireland and Northern Ireland to write stories for the newspaper. And did he actually go or not? That's still part of the mystery, and there's a lot of debate and discussions that people have had about his actions there. But what do you think about the events that you've heard? What do you think about anything that we've said about Richard Gaikowski so far? Do you think that suggests that these things are pushing toward him being the Zodiac killer, or do you think that these types of observations are going in the wrong way, possibly being on the East Coast, the disability claim beginning on September of 1968, and the movie Shock Corridor? Please put your ideas in the comments section down below. And I would like to remind everybody that it is now December, and if you're listening to this as it comes out regularly on Zodiac Monday, there will be a Christmas episode of Black Box Online Radio, which will be coming out this year. I usually do one a year. And this one is going to be a little bit different, because I learned that you can upload audio files onto BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNid88 is the website that I've talked to you about for some years now, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. But you can upload audio files to BuyMeACoffee.com, and there will be a special Christmas podcast that is available exclusively on BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNid88, and you don't have to pay anything to listen to it. You can listen to it for free. You can view the gallery on BuyMeACoffee.com. Just feel free to come over there, celebrate Christmas, and the Christmas episode will be coming out on December 23rd of this year, and if you're listening to this in a future date, feel free to go over there as well, and I'll just be leaving it up there. Celebrate Christmas with Black Box Online Radio. And right now, I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts from BuyMeACoffee.com. As previously stated, anybody who makes a donation or contribution will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And this week we have Batman66. Thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And River Prawn Pottery. You two guys are absolutely amazing and very reliable, and I appreciate you so much. These things really help out the channel, and much appreciated. And people can also use the super thanks on YouTube to help support Black Box Online Radio. Now I want to shift gears a little bit and give a shout out to Jerome from the French Wrecking Crew, who posted a video from the YouTube channel Gavin Fish. This is a YouTube presenter whom I had never heard of before, and he was talking about a true crime case that gets mentioned in some of the Zodiac killer circles, and that is the murder of Judith Hakari. I've always pronounced her name Judith Hakari, but he was pronouncing it Hakari, Hakari. Did I get that right? Hakari. Yeah. Okay. Judith Hakari, he was pronouncing it. And Jerome posted the video and it said that the Zodiac killer could have been three people. That was the title of the episode. And of course that got my attention because I've talked to you guys so many times about how there are these multiple killer theories in the Zodiac world, that the Zodiac was not a single serial killer who murdered 5 people in 1968 and 69, that the Zodiac killer could have been multiple people. And looking at these observations, I've gone back and forth over the years. I used to be very, very leaning toward the possibility of multiple killers. I even did an episode once in 2019 called Zodiac Killer Z Psychology, when I said, it looks like we're dealing with the psychology of multiple people here. So I always want to hear what other people have to say about that. And the true focus of his episode was talking about the murder of Judith Hakari, and it was very, very unrelated to the multiple killers theory, except for maybe one sentence at the end when he said that, okay, well, we have these homicides that took place in California and even in Nevada with the disappearance of Donna Lass. Donna Lass was a nurse. Judith Hakari was a nurse. And maybe we have 3 different people who were the Zodiac killer, and that's why there are differences in the crimes. That's why you have the person who sneaks up and shoots the gunshots at people in secluded areas and then runs away, and that's why you have these stories of people attacking nurses. And it ties into a larger theory that could have been an evolutionary aspect of the Zodiac, no matter whom he was or no matter how many people were involved. And then he's like, well, maybe the Zodiac was 3 people, and then maybe even the Lake Berryessa stabbing could have been a 3rd person. But I would like to get some more background information on the murder of Judith Hakari. I'm going over to KCRA News, and this one is called 47 Years Later, Sacramento's Nurse Murder Remains Unsolved, and just citing the source, KCRA News. It's been 47 years since the murder of Judith Hakari. She was found buried in a shallow grave after being kidnapped weeks earlier, and the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department is still looking for the person responsible. Judith Hakari was 23 years old then and returning home around midnight on March 7th of 1970 from work as a nurse. When she didn't arrive home, her fiancé went out to the apartment complex's parking lot and found her car with the light on and the door ajar. Links said that Hakari's fiancé filed a missing persons report. About 7 weeks later, her body was found in a shallow grave in Placer County in the town of Weimar. She had been sexually assaulted and battered about the head and strangled, and to this day we have not found a perpetrator. No DNA of the suspect was found, and the Sheriff's Department relies on tips from the public. The evidence in this case was pretty degraded because she was buried in a shallow grave, they said. But with the newer technology that we have, we are hoping that there will be some evidence that can be reanalyzed in the hopes of finding some DNA. Alright though, I think absolutely would have to be entertaining some type of Zodiac killer, multiple killers theory when you're looking at a crime like this. Sexually assaulting the victim, abducting the victim, burying her in a shallow grave. But it's not to say that the Zodiac killer wasn't operating in 1970. And there are some possible Zodiac crimes that took place in 1970. The first would be the Kathleen Johns abduction off of Highway Route 132, and I should be clear, the attempted abduction of Kathleen Johns, who was able to get away, and the disappearance of Donna Lass on September 6 of 1970. Now, these crimes are very different because Donna Lass was abducted from the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino, and Kathleen Johns was abducted from a roadside butt. And I just want to point out that this crime took place before the Kathleen Johns abduction on March 22nd of 1970. This crime was on March 7th of 1970, so I don't think that the Zodiac killer would have somehow become worse at abducting women. It seems like this person was a much more cutthroat and ruthless abductor in the Kathleen Johns case. And we aren't even certain if everything in the Kathleen Johns story is true, that there actually was an abductor or anything like that going on. But, however, Donna Lass was abducted on September 6 of 1970 while working at the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino in State Line, Nevada. And that would be something that sounds very similar. That would be a case that sounds very similar to the abduction and murder of Judith Hakari, because you have women, nurses, who are alone. I mean, this person could have watched Judith Hakari leave whatever place of employment or wherever she was coming from. Maybe this person is zoned in on nurses because he realizes that they could be easy targets. He realizes that they could be the type of individual that are going to be working odd hours. Maybe he developed an infatuation with nurses once because he was staying in a hospital for a while. Now we're back to the hospital connection. And there are similarities among, or rather between, Donna Lass and Judith Hakari. And is that what happened to Donna Lass? We aren't sure. Her remains were never found, and the perpetrator in the Judith Hakari case does not seem extremely competent when it comes to hiding the body. For example, she was found on a shallow grave. This person was also near Sacramento, and Donna Lass was in the Lake Tahoe region, which, as I understand, is roughly about 2.5 hours by car, but don't quote me on that. Now, it's possible that there could be some type of connection and there was a serial predator out there, but that is only speculation. However, rest in peace to Judith Hakari, and there is an article about her on ZodiacCyphers.com as well called The Murders of Hakari and Benelak, and this presenter, Gavin Fish, openly stated at the end of his episode the reason why he chose to do this episode called The Zodiac Killer Could Have Been Three People and then focus it on Judith Hakari was the murder of Judith Hakari was a true crime case that he learned about very early on in his true crime journey, and it's something that he had remembered and it stayed with him, and there was a personal reason why he chose to discuss that. But overall, I'm not seeing a lot of signs of being Zodiac related, and there aren't even a lot of signs that there were 3 Zodiac killers. Now, I think that Donna Lass was abducted by a different person. If you're going to look at the unconfirmed events, then there are going to be all types of killers. I think a different person murdered Sherry Jo Bates. I think a different person murdered Ray Davis. So, yes, then you have multiple killers. And it's going to go so far beyond that because there are all types of different theories out there in the Zodiac world. And as I said, I now do interviews on this channel, and on Fridays I've been putting out the Zodiac Killer interviews, and on Tuesdays and Wednesdays I've been releasing other types of true crime interviews. And this week on the Tuesday and Wednesday show, respectively, I will be releasing my interview with Brian Davis of the Tate LaBianca radio program. That is one that I've been looking forward to a lot because longtime BBOR followers will know that I talk about the Tate LaBianca radio program frequently on the channel. I've been a listener for years. I've heard Brian Davis talk about Charles Manson and the Tate LaBianca murders for years, and I was looking forward to discussing the case with him. And on the Wednesday show, I will be releasing the interview with Justin Daneman, who has a bunch of observations about the CIA and the government and intelligence agencies, so lots of different types of content coming out here on Black Box Online Radio. But during my discussion with Brian Davis, we had the opportunity to talk about a Zodiac killer suspect named Bruce Davis, no relation. He is the subject of the book The Zodiac Manson Connection, and the Zodiac Manson connection goes beyond Bruce Davis being the Zodiac killer. It's also that Charles Manson masterminded the Zodiac murders. And Bruce Davis is a rather odd Zodiac killer suspect because, much like Richard Gaikowski, there's a possibility that he might not have been in the country in December of 1968 for the Lake Herman Road murder. But Bruce Davis experiences some odd things. Well, it's not odd to him, but it's odd to us when we're looking back at his timeline. For example, he goes to England in the fall of 1968. He comes back in the spring of 1969. Then there are the Tate LaBianca murders in the summer of 69. Then he goes back to England, and, I mean, we'll pay attention to the timeline later on. But the story that Brian Davis had shared with me was the suspicious death of Joel Pugh. Joel Pugh was somebody who died in England in December of 1969, so this would be on the possible second trip from Bruce Davis. And I say possible because I'm going to read you guys an article from CharlesManson.com that talks about the suspicious death of Joel Pugh. Now, it was ruled a suicide, but it quite possibly could have been a murder. More or less, Joel Pugh was the former lover of an individual named Sandy Good, who went on to run with the Manson family. And Joel Pugh started out by just dating Sandy Good, and everything was going well, and then they began introducing their new partners to each other's parents during their home visits in Boulder Creek for her and Minnesota for Joel. The young girl was named Sandy Good. Sometime around March of 1968, Joel's girlfriend Sandy met Charles Manson and was absolutely mesmerized by Manson and began hanging around with him and another hippie type, all of whom worshipped Manson. Sandy Good began following suit. Joel was extremely embarrassed about this infatuation with Manson and felt that Manson was a fake and only cared about himself. Joel tried countless times to convince Sandy that Manson was nothing but bad news and she should steer clear of him for her own good. However, despite all of these warnings and pleas and advice, Sandy was following Manson everywhere, which led to the collapse of their relationship. Manson had a keen eye on Sandra as she was collecting $2,000 per month in a trust fund in payments that her father had left her, which would wind up being the majority of money the Manson family lived off of. After Sandy was gone, Joel spiraled into a deep depression, believing that he would never find true love again. He once remarked that he wished he was a drug. He wished that there was a drug that would just make him happy. At one point, Sandy briefly returned pregnant and requested to use Joel's last name for the baby, but Joel refused. Sandra used the surname on the baby's certificate anyway. The certificate clearly states that Ivan S. Pugh, maybe Ivan, was born to Sandra Good on September 16th of 1969. The period of havoc at the Spawn Ranch, which Sandy probably realized would label the baby offspring as an offspring of the commune. It would be safer to name the baby after Joel, which she did. By this point, Joel had checked out on life itself, stopped working at the laboratory, and moved back home with his parents in Minnesota. Despite all of his depression, he never tried to follow Sandy to the communes or locations where she lived with the family, perhaps out of fear. After returning home, Joel began to travel to various places around the world, including South America, Morocco, Spain, Europe, and West Kensington, London, where he decided to stay at the Tallgarth Hotel at 7 Tallgarth Road, Hammersmith, in London. The fact that Joel remained in a deep depression even there was no secret to the hotel workers, who often had short chats with Joel and would rarely see him consume anything but coffee during his time or leave his own room. On December 1st of 1969, Joel Dean Pugh's body was found in his room in the Tallgarth Hotel in London by the police after the hotel manager could not gain entry to the room after being notified by the cleaning crew that no one was answering the door and that Joel had not been seen in or around his room. When the police arrived, they found Joel's wrist cut and his throat slit twice. In the room, there was no suicide note, however. There was writing on a mirror, however, that the police didn't keep a record of. They didn't record the writing. I think that's so weird. They ruled the death a drug-induced suicide due to his declining mental state and the amount of time he was spending isolated in his room. In addition to him being known for smoking marijuana, the coroner's report included an opinion on which agreed with the initial thoughts of the police that it was indeed a suicide. When word reached the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office of Pugh's death, Vincent Bugliosi and Stephen Kay were currently building the prosecution's case against the Manson family for the Tate LaBianca murders, took special notice that Manson associated with an individual named Bruce Davis, and Bruce Davis was out of the country and supposedly in the United Kingdom visiting the Church of Scientology, and perhaps even in London. Considering Pugh's past relationship with Sandra Good, the state attorneys were extremely suspicious of the timing of his death and believed Davis was involved with the death. This was never proven. Scotland Yard's reply through Interpol, the check regarding Bruce Davis by Frank Fowles. It has been established that Davis's recording as embarking at London Airport for the United States on April 25th of 1969 while holding a U.S. passport. At this time, he gave his former address as Dormer Cottage, Felbridge, Surrey. This address is owned by the Scientology movement, by houses and followers of this organization. The local police are unable to give any information concerning Davis, but they understand that he has visited our country more recently than April of 1969. However, this is not borne by any official record. Okay, so why am I sharing this with you on Zodiac Monday? Number one, after Bruce Davis comes back to America on, as they said, April 25th of 1969, then he does get into the trouble with the Manson family during the summers of 1969. That's ultimately what sent him to jail and being there for life in prison. I once interviewed Howard Davis, author of the Zodiac Manson Connection, and he said very clearly, when Bruce Davis is on the run, he goes back to England after the Tate LaBianca murders. After the murder of Shorty Shea, Bruce Davis goes back to England, which is what this statement here from Scotland Yard is talking about. And that's when there is the suspicious death of Joel Pugh in the hotel room on December 1st of 1969. Now here's the important part. Bruce Davis must have been out of the country for at least 4 months, possibly even 5 or 6 months, from 1968 to 1969, at the time of the Lake Herman Road murders. Bruce Davis openly says that he was not in the country, he was in England. I mean, of course he's not going to admit to it. He's a convicted murderer who's trying to get paroled. I can understand that, but there's the statement all the same, and it says that he was out of the country until April 25th of 1969. That much has been recorded by Scotland Yard. But I just have to be very clear about some things. Even somebody like Joel Pugh, who is just drinking coffee and getting high on drugs, did he really slit his throat twice? I suppose that that's possible. I mean, people do very, very vicious things when they're high on drugs, particularly people who get high on meth or PCP or just very strong drugs out there. Now, I haven't looked at Joel Pugh's toxicology report, but I do have my doubts that this was a suicide. It seems like it's quite possible that he could have been murdered just based on that information alone. But further investigation would be necessary. What it appears, though, is that Bruce Davis's timeline is just littered with uncertainty. Now, it looks like he's very clearly in the country for the Blue Rock Springs shooting, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and the Stein murder. Then, the way that this would have worked with the Stein murder is that Paul Stein would be murdered on October 11th of 1969. Then Bruce Davis went to the airport, got a flight to Las Vegas, actually, not California even, Las Vegas, and then entered California, going to Death Valley. And he's arrested at the Barker Ranch on October 12th of 1969 in the evening. Because when I talked to Howard Davis as well, I asked him, well, I mean, doesn't that suggest that he was just in Death Valley the whole time? Howard Davis points out that Paul Stein is murdered in the evening, and then Bruce Davis is murdered in the evening. And then, could he have gone back to England in the fall of 1969 and murdered Joel Pugh? It definitely requires more investigation. I wouldn't rule that out, because there's a certain amount of evidence that, to me, where I would just look at the death of Joel Pugh and I would say, well, that's not immediately a suicide. I mean, maybe if it was only the wrist cutting, or maybe if he had just died by hanging, or he had just died of a drug overdose, I would say, well, yes, of course, that's consistent with a suicide. But this could also be something that is significant of a murder, or this could be a clue that is pointing toward murder, the throat being cut twice. But as far as Bruce Davis's activities in 1969, not only is it uncertain, Bruce Davis has the complete wrong body type for being the Zodiac killer, 5 feet 6 inches tall, another hard Alabama accent. I mean, I'd say another one because I've talked about the Zodiac suspect Joseph Paul Franklin previously in this episode. He also had a hard Alabama accent, and I'm just seeing that a lot of points are moving away from Bruce Davis. More question marks than answers, let's just say that, and they aren't necessarily strong or valuable questions either. But I would also like to remind you guys that on Black Box Online Radio, I am now releasing the audio version of my books for free. I, Ned DeHaan, am the author of Killer on a White Horse, A Story of the Evening Watchman, and it is a murder mystery that was inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, and the entire audiobook is now available here on BBOR for free. And also, I will be releasing the first part of Down the Dark Lane, 3 thrillers from the Motel, this weekend. So lots of things to look out for here on Black Box Online Radio. You can hit the like button and subscribe once again. And I'm working on the next story in the White Horse Killer saga, and that's going to be exclusively on YouTube in audiobook format. And please don't go to Amazon and try to buy them. You can just listen here for free. And I would like to remind everyone that this episode of Black Box Online Radio is brought to you by Capital One. Capital One is the home of the Quicksilver card, and a great way that you can support this channel is by signing up for the Capital One Quicksilver. You will get a $200 sign-on bonus. That's right, $200 just for using the card in the first 3 months. It is like getting money handed to you. It's real. I've done it before, and there are links pinned in the comment section down below, as well as in the description box. And if you have any questions, I will definitely answer them for you. But that's pretty much how it works. You sign up and you get $200 when you use the card during your first 3 months. Now, I would like to conclude with something, though, about mysteries and stories that have evolved into Zodiac-related material. And for those of you who just simply want to hear more and more about the Zodiac Killer, I would recommend going over to Ray Grant's YouTube channel. He has launched his series, Zodiac Killer Walkthrough, and he's putting out hours and hours of Zodiac-related content. And in one episode, he talked about how the Zodiac Killer could have been inspired by the play and movie Rope. The play is more famously attributed, the movie is more famously attributed to Alfred Hitchcock, but the play was written by Patrick Hamilton, and it is the source material for the movie. And Ray Grant also went further by saying that in October of 1970, the Zodiac Killer would mail the Halloween card, which had the words, "By rope, by knife, by gun, by fire." And Ray Grant believes that the words "by rope" are a direct reference to the play or movie Rope. And this is one of the Hitchcock films that I haven't watched before, and I've definitely loved Alfred Hitchcock's work in the past. And I was messing around on YouTube, and I found that there wasn't a free copy of the movie, but there was a free version of the stage play, and specifically the radio theater version, starring Alan Rickman as one of the roles. It's radio theater from the BBC. It was made in 1983, so I decided to give that a listen. And it was absolutely entertaining. It starts out a bit slow, but the final 20 minutes were just amazing. And Alan Rickman has such a signature voice that, he just captivates you anytime he's talking about anything. But Ray Grant's theory is that there was something called the Zodiac Killer Project. It was a conceptual art project that was conceived by an individual named Berta Margulies, and that she was a famous artist, actually a sculptor, and that she conceived this murderous conceptual art plan and involved 3 other participants, her son Michael O'Hare, as well as Gareth Penn and his father Hugh Penn. And the 4 of them were the 4 Zodiacs, and they worked on this sinister art project for decades, putting it into action. Now, as far as the play Rope goes, it starts out talking all about, murderous conceptual art, believe it or not. Somebody incorporates other people to be involved in a murder, and that's not giving anything away. That's like in the first 5 minutes. A murder. For what reason? Well, there's no reason. Just to commit the murder for the sake of committing the murder. And then later on, the characters talk about how, it was done for thrill, it was done for power, it was done to see if they could get away with it. I'm paraphrasing all of that. But they even talk about how they could have incorporated a different person into this murderous art plan, but they thought that he was definitely artistic, but then they thought he didn't have the mindset for it. And I don't necessarily think that this piece of literature, Rope, by Hamilton, was an influence on the Zodiac Killer, but it does appear that it was a very big influence on the creation of Ray Grant's Zodiac Killer theory, and Ray Grant's book, Zodiac Killer Solved, looking at how there was this type of person who is more or less incorporating people into a plan to commit murder, and they're thinking about it in an artistic way. They're thinking about it in a way that has meaning to them that might not have meaning to other people, and also just to prove that they can get away with it. And it's definitely committing homicides for a reason that a lot of other people wouldn't understand. But that's just my take on the subject. And if anybody would like to listen to that one more time, that is from the play Rope, 1983 version, BBC Radio, available here on YouTube for free. And ultimately, that's going to bring us to the end of today's episode. I would love to know what you guys think. Do you have any comments about the murder of Judith Hakari? Any comments about the suspicious death of Joel Pugh? Do you have any comments about Bruce Davis as a Zodiac Killer suspect, about Richard Gaikowski as a Zodiac suspect? And I'm just going to address the elephant in the room. I don't believe that Bruce Davis was in the country on December 20th of 1968 for the Lake Herman Road murders. And back in 2020, I even addressed this in a previous episode, and I was saying, to any supporter of the Zodiac Manson connection, what would make more sense to me is to not even incorporate Bruce Davis into your theory for that. Instead, what they could do is, or what would make more sense using the facts that we do have, is that David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were murdered by affiliates of a biker gang, because the Manson family heavily interacted with the biker gangs, particularly the Straight Satans. Then you could say that the Zodiac Killer was conceived on April 26th of 1969 or something, when Bruce Davis returns from England, and they just told him the stories, and he used it in the Zodiac letters. But I don't think that Bruce Davis was the Zodiac Killer. I think he has the wrong body type. His whereabouts are questionable. And even the preceding material that I just gave you right there was me fudging the facts to try and make it work. So that's my take on the subject. But what do you think about Richard Gaikowski as a Zodiac Killer suspect? What do you think about the comments made by Robert Graysmith that the murder of Paul Stein was committed because the Zodiac wanted to reach a larger group of people, that he wanted to get more media attention, that he wanted more people looking at his story, and he wanted to just spread his image of terror throughout the San Francisco Bay Area and ultimately the country? What do you think about that? Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there was always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram, and I will see you over there. Goodbye.